Good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar from Purdue University. Our seminar speaker today is Randall Brooks. He is a Purdue grad, CS undergrad here from about 15 years ago. He's got his Purdue shirt on to prove it. He's working for the Raytheon Corporation now. He's an engineering fellow there, and his topic today is adding a software assurance dimension to supply chain practices. Randall?
Great, good. And I'm very excited to be here. I've been wanting to come here and talk in front of you guys for a very long time, so hopefully this will be a good talk. All right. So our agenda, we're going to talk about what is the supply chain problems that we have today. We're going to talk about some of the legacy ways that we've handled supply chain in the past with respect to acquisition, subcontract management, things like that. There's some industry best practices that I'm going to point folks to, so it's a good place to do additional research on how this is done in the industry, the things to take a look at and dive into. This is only a short, maybe 45-minute talk. It's a 50 minutes total with all the questions. And I'm going to give us some examples on an approach to handle cyber, what we use the term cyber, to kind of cover cybersecurity, things as software assurance and those things fall under, and talk about how you can apply that to supply chain and give you some key takeaways, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So what we wanted to really kind of get across right up the front is that vulnerabilities do exist in one supply chain. There's many risk factors that folks have to deal with, and when thinking about vulnerabilities and how they flow into one system that they're developing. And we're going to talk about systems and software assurance. That's a term that we kind of coined. Software assurance, SWA, as it's commonly referred to, is really focused on making sure that that software is really secure and going to execute as you planned, and I'm going to define that later. And then and the systems that you put together that run on that with respect to the hardware and all those other pieces, putting that together, we kind of call that systems and software assurance, and looking at evaluations of your suppliers, their contractors, and so forth. And systems and software assurance should be done on all third-party contracts. As you buy things from other suppliers, you need to be sure that what they deliver to you is going to be secure, and as you build it into your system and build it into your supply chain, that it won't affect you as you go down the line. And we're going to define something that we like to use a term as the next level supplier principle, and we'll talk about that later, and we'll really focus on observing that in subcontract management and things like that. So counterfeits, that has been a big problem as of late, and most of the time the counterfeits that folks have been trying to get into supply chain have been focused on profit. However, there has been examples in the past, and there's just one of many that kind of references counterfeit parts that have gotten into DoD and government systems, potentially causing future exploits that could happen. So they could have a real physical response to having a counterfeit product. Here's an example or a picture of real-life photos. Folks today actually take old system boards and remove all the ICs and those parts. They disassemble all of those things and create big piles. So when you hear folks recycle your electronics in environmental fashion, you want to do that because there are actual folks out there trying to take chips, take them off the board, resell them in various capacities, and I'll talk about a little bit later on how that affects hardware. Your supply chain, and I know this is really hard to see in this, but your supply chain is very complex, and your suppliers, they themselves have suppliers. And as you build up a system, it could have hardware, software, and other components, and your supplier probably has a supplier for something, and so forth and so on, and all of that trickles into your environment, and as such can cause various weaknesses along those paths. So the government is really interested in supply chain. One of the things that came out from the government is the Comprehensive National Security Initiative, specifically the Initiative 11, focusing on a global approach for supply chain risk management. They really were kind of looking for a lot of focused tool sets, ways to manage this, and other good insight and thought on this problem with respect to a supply chain. The Department of Defense is also interested in this arena. Last year, there was Ike Skelton National Defense Authorization Act. There's usually a National Defense Authorization Act coming out every year with respect to how the government gets their ability to purchase equipment for the military and other things like that. And Section 806 focused specifically on supply chain risk. What it really got into is that folks could be excluded if they fail to meet minimum quality standards with respect to their covered systems. And covered systems are things that are used to protect the national security of the United States. There's also exclusions on your sources. So if they themselves don't meet an acceptable rating, they could be excluded. And then those contracts and contractor, your contract could be withheld from that, in that a specific source could not be used with respect to future contracts and things along that line. As you roll all that up, and the biggest kind of just at how all this kind of comes about is that a contractor could be banned if they deliver repeated systems with vulnerabilities. So they could be blacklisted from a government perspective. So getting back, it was kind of, you yourself can get yourself in that position, but even if your supplier kind of trickles in and you are the one responsible for the system, you could be blacklisted. And then if someone is using you for a procurement, then you would be banned from that. So we looked at this and said, what are, folks doing with respect to that? Looking at contract language, various different things. So, what kind of questions do we ask? We develop things called preferred supplier vendor lists. We ask questions about, is this financially stable? Do we have experience with these guys? Do they deliver it on time? Is it good quality? You could have a lot of experience with them and have a good warm and fuzzy that, hey, I know that when he says it's going to come on Friday, it's going to come on Friday. And I don't have to worry about that. It's going to be there, and it's going to be a good quality thing. It meets the requirements. There's other aspects that they look at, and depending on what your requirements are, it might be a foreign country to you. So you might have the requirement to make it only develop in one particular country, and that limits who you can buy that item from. So if you bought it from a certain country and you've liked them a lot, but you might be limited on who you could choose depending on various contract requirements that's being placed upon you. And then, of course, they could be on that banned list. You could have banned them, or one of your sister companies could have banned that supplier, depending on how it is. And then, as we just talked, the government could have banned them. So we have these preferred supplier lists, folks that we really like to buy things from. So these are the common questions that typically, as we go and buy things, these are the questions we ask, and they tend to be the only questions that we ask. So we get into the quality of the product, delivered okay, delivery schedule, payment. Payment's also very important. Scheduled payments, delivery. If we have a problem where we buy a product and they wait a year to bill us, sometimes that can become financially a big problem with respect to buying things from that vendor. There are various quality requirements, so they do deliver something of good quality. These are all really great points, but they really miss some of the aspects that we're kind of focusing on, which is looking at the security requirements. So do they have any product security requirements? Could be of great quality, but they might not have any cybersecurity or any kind of requirements like that placed and levied on them. Do they have anti-counterfeit measures? We just showed an example of big pile sets of chips. What we've seen in the past is that folks would take and scrape off a version number and say, okay, this chip is revision A. It's now being sold as revision C, but revision A had a way to exploit via software to cause a hardware feature. Maybe it malfunctions or degrades over a certain period of time. If I send a certain packet or I send a little RF signal to it, whatever happens, we can cause that product to malfunction, but we're going to say it's a better version. That's something we need to think about. So anti-counterfeit, how do we do those types of things? Software assurance, our big focus. Do they have secure coding practices? How do they test for software assurance? In fact, what is software assurance? What does that mean? And how to demonstrate that, measure it. This is big problems that folks have to deal with today. Even if I place all these requirements on a vendor, how does the person procuring this know that, sure enough, they do develop securely or they do have anti-counterfeit processes? How do I test for all of that? So what we talk about is passing requirements on to our vendors in this particular section. And with respect to this, the risk is purposely fuzzy. In this photo, it is fuzzy for a reason. We don't know if we're going to transfer that risk. We don't know if we're going to reduce that risk or avoid that risk. In this particular case, we're transferring it down. But when we talked about the next level, or the principle of passing those requirements down one level, you can actually have the ability to do the next level beyond that. So you can say, Mr. Supplier, please give me all of those things. Give me software assurance. Give me a non-counterfeit product. Give it to me in a secure fashion, but ensure that your suppliers have that down. So that's the next level down principle, and ensuring that as it flows into you, that you can stop it there and at least transfer the risk down to that particular vendor. And you can create contract requirements to ensure that that happens. You want to ensure that, so what you're really trying to do is focusing on that whole chain, that they themselves, that contractor will probably copy and paste your requirements and send that down. And so you're pushing those requirements down the chain and ensuring that you're having a good cyber-related supply chain as you develop that.
Recursion.
Yes, it is recursion, exactly. So software assurance, our systems and software assurance, so we're going to define that. Systems assurance is the justified confidence, and I'm going to do a little mouse-o here. So it's the justified confidence that a system functions as intended, and really getting into the free of exploitable vulnerabilities. So it'd really be nice if that system, we have a good warm and fuzzy that it's going to execute, not have vulnerabilities. And then software assurance is that levels of confidence, and a very similar definition, that software is free from vulnerabilities. And it kind of goes on and talks about intentionally or unintentionally inserted. In some of the cases in supply chain, it's unintentionally inserted. If I bought a product, it could have just been compiled. If I bought a library, a software library, I compile that and I use those function calls. Those function calls I could be accessing, could be exploitable, but I didn't know it was there. So it was unintentioned, it's there, and we really want to ensure software assurance in that. So a group, and I've heard that this has been talked about quite frequently, the group out in Department of Homeland Security, they have a software assurance group. They're building security and initiative. So the Software Assurance Forum has really been a good group that we've looked to and been part of, and a regular attender of their forum meetings. There's actually one next week. And they've broken down software assurance into conformance, predictable execution, and trustworthiness. And conformance gets into the various different requirements or procedures that your software has to execute into. Your predictable execution gets into that justifiable word, that justifiable confidence the software is going to execute. And then trustworthiness, that no exploitable vulnerabilities exist. And so you'll kind of see some of those same words coming in here. There's a nice little link, buildsecurityn.us -cert.gov. I recommend folks go take a look at what they have. A lot of the content in this brief references the work that they've done. And next week, like I said, they have a meeting. They have twice a year, and I do recommend folks get involved in the work that they're doing. The NIST, folks, the National Institute of Standards, has an interagency report, number 7622, talking about supply chain risk. They kind of focus on the holistic group that you kind of have to assemble. You know, it's the IA group, or the Information Assurance Group, the real cybersecurity focused entity. The guys who buy things, the procurement, could be your buyers or purchaser or your supply chain or whatever you call them. Legal, you have to get legal involved because this is contract requirements that you're going to place down, and your vendor might say, this is too much, I can't do it. And then your information steward, the owner, the guy who's going to use this system, does this make sense for them? Because you don't want to leverage too many requirements. You want to get the right balance, and balancing that risk is really hard. And from that, you're going to develop a cyber supply chain risk management capability. That group will come together, and they will bring in all of that good mindset and work with your business and make sure it fits with how you do business, applying all those aspects together. And there's a little link at the bottom to the 7622. It's a good place to look for these types of topics. Other topics out there, and we kind of made some really big so you can see them. This one here is the Application Security Development STIG, which is Security Technology Implementation Guide that the DISA group, Defense Information Security Agency, produces. It talks about how to build a secure software system. It talks about various different requirements. If product A is going to talk to product B and having encryption between them, or doing other things through your life cycle. One of the areas they really get into is procurement, buying these types of things. And then as you bring those things into your system, testing them. The Software Assurance Risk Management Due Diligence Guide, and these two blue ones here, you'll see the Software Assurance logo from the Department of Homeland Security, the Building Security and effort there. They have a due diligence pocket guide and a software assurance acquisition language pocket guide that actually has a good set of verbiage that allows folks to copy and paste that information into a contract. And so that information gives you a good leverage point, so you can take a look at that, think about your requirements that you have to place on your vendors. You could use that as good legalese, paste that in there, and allow to pass those requirements down your supply chain. The NIST 853, there's a new revision, and I forgot to look, but a couple weeks ago I did not see it, but there is a draft revision focusing specifically on supply chain. So there's various controls. So if you're going to buy, and I think one of them is, if you're going to buy a piece of software, how are you going to be ensured that it's delivered to you and someone doesn't interject themselves into the mailman scenario? Here's your piece of Microsoft Office, but it doesn't have the Microsoft Genuine Advantage or something along that line. How does one deliver that securely to you? How do you test for those types of things? And they have 3 levels of testing. I believe the last version that I saw had it the various highest levels of requirements. But how do you test for those types of things as they come in? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about testing here upcoming. The 800 series by NIST, special pubs, they are just in general a good place to look for any topic with respect to information security, and software assurance is definitely covered under there. The 30, 37, 39. 39 is actually subsedes 30. 30 is actually a pretty decently written document. It talks about how to take a look at a system, assess it, determine risk. And determining risk is extremely important in with respect to what requirements you're going to pass down, in ensuring that vulnerabilities do not get through your development life cycle, and making sure that, you know, as you deliver it, it will be secure and not have risk to your customer. 37 actually gets into kind of certification and accreditation. How do I prove that it meets the risk level that my customer is going to accept? 27 talks about information security engineering principles with respect to IT systems. And then 864 is a very good one, security considerations in a system development lifecycle. All of this is a part of your system development lifecycle. As you go through requirements, development, implementation, and test, and however you want to call your lifecycle, at some point you're going to make that make-buy decision. Am I going to buy it or am I going to make it? In some cases, you're going to make some of it, you're going to buy part of it. And so a lot of times, you're going to write a big hunk of code, but you're going to farm out some of the code to someone I had go work with in the past. They can write this module really fast. We can't beat their price. We're going to have those guys do it for us. But, you know, did we ask that question? Did they even develop it securely? I mean, they wrote it in 1 week. You know, actually, someone asked me the question, CMMI, level 5, those types of things, all the capability maturity model, how does all that build in? There is something called the build security in methodology model, and not many companies have really done that, really had a look at the practices that they do with respect to software assurance, but that's kind of an interesting question. I've seen it actually in contracts that have been passed to us, and I've reviewed it, and it said, do you test your software for security vulnerabilities? You know, do you? And in some cases you may or may not. And when you pass those down to customers, they have to really think about that. You know, for us, we want to ensure that what we deliver is most as secure as possible. So we really consider those. You know, how do we test those types of things? And they become very big topics on how do you manage that risk. You don't want to test forever, you'll run out of money. So you got to find that right balance. So as you get into your life cycle, you planning, contracting, monitoring, sustainment, and disposal, you are going to go out and buy from a customer, and we have a nice little picture here of, you know, minimal risk, low risk, moderate risk, high risk. That supplier could be one of those, depending on how they either deliver a system or how you test for a system. Now, we have a couple references here. The product in which they could be delivering to you, here is a link to ensuring software assurance process maturity. It's a software assurance checklist. It helps you check off a bunch of questions that you could be asking yourself as you go down this procurement process and saying, is this one I'm going to buy from? Do they deliver securely? There's also questionnaires in the software supply chain risk management and due diligence questionnaire that you can look at. It asks them the various questions, such as, do you have a secure coding practices? How do you test for that? There was a talk a couple weeks ago, talked about common weaknesses and enumerations. That's a very important topic. Those are weaknesses in code that could be coded into your software. You need to be testing that yourself, but then you'll ask the question to your contractor, do you have secure coding practices? They might say yes. You say, okay, do you test for common weaknesses and enumerations? How do you do that? Do you do static source code analysis for those types of topics? Do you test for common weaknesses and enumerations? Common vulnerabilities and exposures, CVEs. And those are known vulnerabilities out there. So if they're going to deliver you a whole computer system running on Windows 7 and all those types of things, is it patched to the right level? And is there any exploitable system that could be dependent on another aspect of the system in which they're delivering? Do you test for that? They might say yes, they might not. So as you develop all of these types of things, you're going to create supply chain artifacts, and you're going to really focus on that preferred supplier list. Who is it that I'm going to buy from in the future? From planning, contracting, all these types of things, they all link into this, and it goes all the way down even to disposal. As you go through your life cycle and you buy something from them, and the first initial one could be, hey, let's get something to those guys really fast. We're going to test it. We're going to do lots of good testing. They're going to look at it and say, this is good stuff, but as we go along, we're going to be a little bit more laxed on that. We can't meet the cost in which we quoted that person, our customer, if we keep doing that kind of level of testing. So we're going to lower that. And so as you go all the way down to disposal, you might see things over time that perhaps they introduce more vulnerabilities and those types of things. So there are things that you want to be thinking and with respect to that. So you're going to do a supplier business assessment and really kind of look at that product or source, that supplier or their source of that they might be a reseller of. What version is it? There could be known problems with that particular version. You could, by explicitly buying a development product, so you're going to use this product to create another product in that particular version at which they're quoting you, it's a really good price. That version could be full of vulnerabilities. It could be a bad compiler. It could just spit out bad code, and that's really not what you want. So you could code all you want and make something really secure, but your compiler then made it really bad for you. The business risk they acquire is that, are they going to go out of business? That, if we place these requirements down on them, they could say, I can't do it. I give up. You ran me out of business. That's not going to work. The criticality of the system. This really might not be something you want to do all of this for. If you have a good relationship with that vendor and you're going to ask the question, hey, they're on the preferred supplier list. They always deliver on Fridays when I order it. It's kind of like Amazon Prime. I know when I buy that thing, 2 days later it's on my doorstep, and I love that. If you have that kind of relationship with that supplier and you know that it's going to happen that way, and you know it's going to come in a sealed box, and you've had that good relationship with them, you might not need to do any additional testing. You might not need to be thinking about those types of things. Like I said, those types of things could put them out of business. We have lots of requirements placed on cars to protect people as they drive them, and to make them more secure, it makes the car more robust, more heavier, or other aspects that you have to add to that, which increases the cost of what the car costs. Subcontract management, really the practices for their suppliers too. Do they do anything, or do they say, I'm going to just go hire a temp coder and have them come in and code this part really fast for me, and I'm just going to link that in and I'm going to deliver it to you? That really might not work as you go down. So all this, those are kind of things that you have to think about. So I am going to start talking about some recommendations with respect to that. How would one test? How would one think about really what we call systems and software assurance? And the first one we're going to talk about is things that are specific to hardware. I showed a picture earlier of a big pile of chips, folks etching off different labels, trying to get those in there. There's quality counterfeits and malicious alterations. It may not be any one of those, but just plain counterfeiting. Counterfeiting is a big problem out there. Lots of folks, going out to buy chips and say, do you have 1,000 of chip or ICX? Nope. 2 days later, I got a phone call, hey, we have that chip. Maybe that's good, maybe that's not, maybe that's the case, we don't know. Could be a counterfeit chip, could be that, hey, they found some sitting in a warehouse. I've heard, folks like I think, like action figures, like our Star Wars figures or things like that. Like the mint on card, like original 1977 cards are worth so much money, and folks finding some in an old room that they open a door and here's an unopened box from Kenner that has a whole bunch of things. So maybe they found that. Maybe that is that chip that you're looking for. And you think about the lifetime of your system and the software that's out there could be 10, 20 years running on a really old piece of hardware. You might not have the money to recode that system. That person could have left the company. What do I do with this critical asset? My hardware is failing. I need to replace that board. To build that board, I need this chip and only that chip. How do I get it? So that there's things that you need to be thinking about, testing those chips, looking at them. There are problems with ASICs, FPGAs, microprocessors, people getting in malicious content into those types of things, or trying to interject that into your development of those. Volatile memory, this one, I usually give the example of BIOS or things like that. You bought something, has something stored on there, and when you plug it in, it now has a nice little payload for you. So you boot your system up, that BIOS takes over the operating system every time you load it, because it's actually in the BIOS firmware. It's a bad BIOS firmware. It has kind of a virus in there, and every time you boot it, you can't do anything but flash that BIOS or get rid of the whole chip or motherboard if need be. But there's been many examples out there in the past of those types of things happening. But if you have a permanent storage, it could have something special, a nice little present on there, and you can take a look at those types of things, or you could do flashing or erasing of those items before you ever put those into production. You don't just slap them on there and deliver it. You want to make sure that it is free of any kind of latent issues. And we have this topic that we termed nano tagging. I talked earlier about the revision A to revision C. Now, nano tagging is a way of coding a chip such that I can verify that that chip has not been modified. So even if they did try to etch off that Rev A and make it Rev C, I can actually see that. Another thing I can do is take a look at that chip and have it formatted in a special way that I know that this batch of chips came from this vendor and it was developed under this time frame and all those types of things. So if I'm being resold this chip, I can say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't match my information. This is not the chip that it should be. It's kind of like a digital signature physically placed on a chip. So if you're familiar with the term digital signatures in message digest, things like that. Now, specific to hardware, or specific to software, you're going to make the determination at some point whether you're going to use free or open source or COTS, or you're going to have it developed yourself. With respect to COTS, source code scans would be really great. Static source code analysis is a really important thing to do. If you could get that source, which the vendor's probably not going to give you because it's their IP, but if you did have that requirement and it's that critical, you can say, Mr. Contractor, I know this is your IP, but I need to look at it. I'm going to test for common weaknesses and enumerations. These specific ones I'm going to test for. You just don't generally say I'm going to test for the top 25 because some of them aren't applicable. It could be the certain set of the 623 that there are. You're going to pick some of those and say, we are going to test you for these sets. And so we're going to scan your software. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to do that. So, but most likely that's not the case. They're going to deliver you a compiled executable. So that piled executable, you got to figure out what are you going to do with it. How am I going to test it? You could run it. You could fuzz it. You could, kind of stimulate that piece of software, see if it's going to crash under known working environments. But one of the things that we like to talk about is static binary analysis. Now, static binary analysis, probably a term may not have been used that much, which is that the binary sits, it's not being run or executed or fuzzed, but it is being disassembled, and we're looking at what does what is the makeup of that binary? What is in that? How is it put together? Now, in some cases, there's a mix between that where now you're going to try to see how that would work in running code. But when you do that, you could run into copyright problems. So you might have an end user license agreement that says, you can't copy my software, and if you are disassembling my software, you're creating a derivative copy of that piece of software, and that might not be good depending on various requirements. You might use escrow. Third-party escrow is very good. If you're concerned that that vendor is going to go out of business, you really might want to do that, where that source code sits there out in that escrow. So, hey, they're not going to give you that source, but they are going to allow someone else to hold that for them. That might be the option for you. Free and open source, you might not have contract. You can't pass a contract language on to that unless there's a commercial entity operating, selling that free and open source. Then a lot of times there are, and it's in various different key free and open source systems. You can't place those contract requirements on them, and the EULA on those items and then the copyright issues could affect the license management. It could be GPL or something along that line. Are you going to violate those types of things? Pedigree and provenance, that's a very good one. Where did it come from, and who, and where has it been? If you're going to buy it from somebody, you want to know that, hey, it came directly from Microsoft, or it came directly from vendor X. It didn't go to some other person to have them slap something else on it or have something go on. You want to make sure that you know where, in fact, it came from. I talked a little bit earlier about it has to be developed within a certain country entity. Well, if you're going to buy it from someone who's headquartered in one country, they might have their development team in another country, and they say, yeah, we're a X country company. I'm going to buy it from them. Hey, I'm meeting my requirement. But in fact, you're actually not, because that's not where the software is coming from. Where has it been? Did it, getting it from its original source produced? We talked, given examples and recommendations on when I'm going to go buy something, how can I prove that this is delivered has a digital signature or some sort of message digest, so when I deliver that or I download that I can verify it. Now, Microsoft has code signing, which is very nice, so I know that as a code signer, this is the person who developed that. I know Apple does that with respect to their development for their App Store and things like that, so you can attribute this to a certain company as they compiled and developed that software, so you know where it's come from. So as you get through this and think about how can I apply some of the things that we learned today, now this is kind of generally written towards businesses and not necessarily an academic environment, but we do recommend folks read the Department of Homeland Security Pocket Guides. They have a large wealth of information on how to handle software assurance, supply chain, risk, and other things along that line. Look at, if you work for a business, how do you do your current supply chain practices? Look at your existing contract language. Do you have any kind of provisions in there? Sometimes it could say, I want to guarantee that this piece of software has no vulnerabilities, but it could be a Solaris binary. Download the Solaris binary, pass the message digest. I take it on a Windows PC and run it for antivirus scan on a Windows box, which does nothing. And you don't find any vulnerabilities. Great, it's a good piece of code. I put it on the Sunbox, and then all of a sudden the computer doesn't boot anymore. So look at that contract language. How do I think about that? Looking at software assurance assessments, system software assurance assessments. So if that's how I was going to test it, it might have made sense to test this in a non-production environment, put it in some sort of virtual machine, run it there before deploying it to production, let it run for a while, stimulate it, fuzz it, attack it, and if you can do Static source code analysis, that's great. Static binary analysis, that's also really helpful, looking for known vulnerabilities and weaknesses in that code. We usually say in about, we kind of mold this over in about 3 months, think about how can I close these gaps? And then as you move on, 6 months, start to implement a plan, choose a pilot, go and start to implement that on an example system. You'll learn a lot doing that, because what you kind of think would generically work for everybody, it's going to be that right level. You're going to have systems that are great business importance to you. They're the ones you're going to spend a lot of money on. The ones that you don't need to do that, you're going to spend a lot less. You're going to have to figure out that right level, and you might have multiple kind of levels that you would apply towards those particular vendors on what kind of levels of contract language you're going to place upon them. So again, and this is some of the things we talked about, there are definitely vulnerabilities in one supply chain. They can get tricked in. You can buy bad chips. You can buy bad software. All of those types of things affect how that comes into your environment. Many risk factors to think about: free and open source, where did it come from, who did I buy it from, how am I going to transfer that risk, systems and software assurance, very important on that supplier, third party with contracts, and then that next level down supplier, pushing that down. And like we talked about, it's basically recursive. They'll push it to their requirement, and to the point in which it becomes expensive, perhaps. And that's about it. Let's see, we have, it's like 41 minutes. So I think we have 9 and a half or 8 or more minutes of questions. Right, go ahead.
The Navy chips, how did they figure out that those were the wrong chips? Was that through testing?
Well, when they find those types of things, they'll do a root cause analysis. I'd have to reread that particular one, but typically when you have a counterfeit part, you will tear the system apart, and you will look at every single different aspect. DARPA has done a lot of research. There's a project out there called Trust that folks can read about. It looks for trustworthy chips and kind of looking at delayering them and figuring out what is the makeup of those chips. But they really do reverse and take a look at those types of things. Very important to the government that that doesn't happen again. And there's lots of forums out there about buying good chips and those types of things. But typically they tear it apart. They take a look at it. They really assess and think about what's the makeup of that system, and they'll find this chip doesn't make sense. They'll look at it, or they'll scan it in some particular fashion, or they'll test the board or whatever it is, and they'll eventually find that one little thing. Could be expensive way to do it. Might be easier. They might find it really fast, but they do take a look at that.
So they installed them in the missiles and then found out there was a problem?
On that particular one, I don't remember off the top of my head.
I don't know if they just got the chips and then found it.
Well, yeah, in some cases they do spot. You can't test every single one. You'll make a 1 penny part cost thousands of dollars. But you might pick one out of a production run and then take a look at it. Yeah. Go ahead.
What do you think of software that is not really malicious or does not really have a vulnerability and does everything that you specified it should do, but it does some additional things instead
Features
that are not really, they're not antagonistic, but they are kind of disloyal in the sense that they're acting not really in your interest. Maybe they're doing some computation for somebody else, or maybe they're going to go to extreme lengths to verify that the license you have is valid, and maybe while it's doing that, it's taking resources away from your system.
Are you talking about maliciously or just
not maliciously, but
it's just
it
doing
is
extra
acting
stuff
for the interests of a third party or maybe the supplier, right? While verifying the license, it's acting in the interests of the supplier.
Yeah, you probably have gone. You may have gone a little too far on your contract requirements if you're spending 99% of your system resources verifying that your system does what it's supposed to do and not actually doing what your mission is, and that kind of violates your whole predictable execution, and you're not doing all the stuff you want to do. I'm a super security guy. I would love to see it be perfect and have kind of defense in depth, like a checker that checks the checker that checks the checker, and you keep, if you did that though, cost would be tremendous. It'd be, like you said, using a lot of resources. They might not be able to do what they want to do, so it's that risk. You got to balance that risk factor and determine how much of requirements you're going to place on them for doing that kind of testing, and in your case, validation of predictable execution.
Well, maybe it doesn't apply for the government, but let's say you get software at a reduced cost or for free if you allow for advertisements to be displayed and things like that. That's the sense of my question. The software may do things other than.
It may. It may, and you're right. Like little pop-up ads and those types of things. If you link in various advertising libraries, they will pop up and have extra things. And I have heard though, like banner ads on websites pulling down and delivering malicious code. So you go to a certain person's website, now they all have a worm because it got pushed down or those types of things. You have to test and make sure that what it's doing is okay with what your mission is for that. So if it's a game, you actually want them to be able to play the game and only have that banner pop up when they're in the main screen, and that you want to make sure that that banner isn't corrupting or making you have a bad name, which you wouldn't want.
If there's nobody else, I have another question.
Okay.
At the beginning, you mentioned that suppliers could get blacklisted and they wouldn't get notified, and there wouldn't be any appeals process. And I'm wondering what is the logic behind that, and is the blacklist secret, or can they find out? Can someone find out if they've been blacklisted?
At least to my knowledge, I don't believe anyone's been placed on that list as of today. But as such, I don't know how one knows yet. I believe that they're going to tell you, I want to buy from vendor X, and that person has been placed on this blacklist. This was something, it was passed, that was passed early last year, so I don't remember, or I haven't heard about anyone being placed on that list, so I don't have a good answer for that, but someone is supposed to tell you from, I think, acquisition, defense acquisition or something like that.
Thanks.
I don't have a good answer for that one. Oh, and I also would like, I had a co-author on here, John Whited, whose name's on here. He wrote a good set of the talk. Him and I collaborate quite a bit on these particular topics at our company. So. And we also have a link down there, the rtncyberjobs.com. We very much look for the serious type of individuals taking these types of courses at our company and things like that. So
The R stand for Raytheon?
Yep. RTN. So
Good time for one more question.
Actually has some good puzzles too. If you go there, it has like little cryptograms and all sorts of things. Very interesting.
If you can solve the puzzle, you get a higher starting wage. Another question? Okay, thank you.